Under the radar, terror groups from Iraq have recently ramped up their attacks against Israel, puzzling international observers and leading many Israelis to ask, what do they want of us? I'm Hanan Lishinsky, and today we'll again try to throw light on an underappreciated and underreported aspect of the months-long war that Israel is in at the moment, which is the attacks by Iraqi terror militias against Israel. Since the start of the current war on October 7, Israel has been at war not just with Hamas, but also with the whole range of the terror groups funded and supported by Iran across the region. While fighting Hamas in the Gaza Strip has been Israel's main focus until now, Israel has also needed to contend to deal with attacks by the Islamic Jihad, also from Gaza as well as Lebanon, by Hezbollah, of course, in Lebanon, which will now become the main focus of the war in the coming weeks, but also with attacks from Syria and Iraq. Now, these attacks have intensified in recent months, and on Sunday evening, the so-called Islamic Resistance of Iraq, an umbrella group of terror organizations funded and supported by Iran, located in Iraq, they claimed to have carried out several strikes against Israel, and indeed the Israeli Defense Forces confirmed that 4 attacks were carried out. These included drone strikes, but also cruise missile strikes, so missiles that are guided and can be very dangerous, as well as on Sunday evening, an attack using a drone swarm, so a whole swarm of drones. We don't know exactly how many, but it stands to reason that it was some number around 5, 6, 7, maybe up to 10 drones. Now, most of those were shot down, but as I said in the beginning, many Israelis and many casual observers maybe will not know, or will not have even known of the existence of these terror groups that have now joined the fight against Israel and are endangering thousands of Israelis with their attacks. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq has, as mentioned earlier, been carrying out these drone strikes and rocket strikes for the past several months. Now, in the beginning, they received some attention for their outlandish claims of having struck significant targets, as they say, or critical targets, sometimes they claim, for example, in the Gulf of Haifa or IDF bases. None of these claims were true. However, over the months, they increased their attacks using drones, and most of them were intercepted, and so far, these attacks have not caused any significant damage or casualties. However, the appearance of these groups on the scene could signal larger problems for Israel going forward. These groups have already said that they want to support Hezbollah, for example. They have said that they want to send arms to Hezbollah as well as fighters in the case of a ground invasion, which could possibly happen in the next weeks or months ahead. And in general, they want to open a new front and make it even harder for Israel to continue fighting on numerous fronts at the same time. In addition, it's important and relevant to say for our audience from the US that these groups, being based in Iraq, have a long history of attacking US targets. They have ramped up their targets on US military personnel in Iraq as well, and have declared that in the case that the fighting between Israel and the Hezbollah will continue to escalate, they will escalate attacks not just on Israel, but also on the US forces based across the region and especially in Iraq. In fact, some of this fighting may have even already begun. We've seen reports in recent days that some of these groups have shot down a US drone above eastern Syria. So these militias are active across the whole region, Iraq, eastern Syria, and Lebanon. But they claim to have shot down a US drone in eastern Syria. And on Friday, a report that was missed among the flurry of reports regarding Israeli attacks in Lebanon, Lebanese attacks, Hezbollah attacks, on Israel. There was also a report that went almost unnoticed, in which Syrian media and Syrian groups claimed that Israel killed a senior commander of one of these Iraqi militias while he was driving in a car near the Syrian capital of Damascus. So the fighting between Israel and all of these groups, Israel, the US on the one hand, and all of these militia groups, has already started. Now, as I already indicated, there are some very well-known terror groups around the world. For example, Hamas, of course, Hezbollah. But the groups in Iraq don't really have the name recognition that many of the other groups have. And even in Israel, as I said, many people are scratching their heads and wondering why are these groups now attacking us from Iraq. So let's try to go a bit behind the scenes. Let's try to give some background. Now, as I said, the group that claims to have carried out all of these strikes is called the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. So Al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya fil Iraq in Arabic. This name, first of all, one can notice that it is very similar to a name that is also used by Hezbollah, which also calls itself the Lebanese Resistance or the Islamic Resistance in Lebanon. So the names are very similar, and the reason for that is that all of these groups, Hezbollah as well as the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, are Shia militias which are backed, supported, funded, directed by the Iranian regime. More specifically, by the Revolutionary Guard Corps and its Quds unit. So the Quds unit, the Quds force, is the unit that is responsible for directing the Iranian regime activities across the Middle East and is directing its terror groups in the region. Now, if we're looking at the history of the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which is also called IRI, it actually doesn't have a long history at all. The name IRI, Islamic Resistance in Iraq, is basically just a name for a Telegram platform which is used by several groups which have coordinated their attacks under this name in order to announce their attacks on Israel and claim responsibility for them. Attacks on Israel and the US forces, it has to be said. So this name is basically the name of the Telegram group. The question remains who coordinates all of the different groups which constitute this Telegram platform, and that again is Iran, as I mentioned earlier. So what happened is that the Iranian Quds force has begun coordinating attacks against Israel between the plethora of armed militia forces which are active in Iraq. In the aftermath of the Iraq War and until now, there were dozens probably of militia groups across Iraq, many of them based on ethnic lines which started fighting at first the US occupation as they saw them, and then they started fighting against the ISIS fighters, against the ISIS terror group, which they see as unbelievers. Now, most of these groups that we talk about here are, again, Shia, in the same way that Iran is Shia, so that's why they have loyalties toward Iran. Starting in 2014, the various groups that had differing loyalties to Shia clerics and to former militaries, all of these various groups started forming an umbrella group which was called the Popular Mobilization Forces, or Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi in Arabic. This umbrella group, over the years, was integrated into the Iraqi military, into the Iraqi government, and today it's a paramilitary organization which is backed and funded in part by the Iraqi government, but some of the constituent groups are being funded and backed, as I mentioned earlier, by the Iranian regime and the IRGC Quds Force. So to reiterate, the IRGC Quds Force in recent years and especially in recent months started to coordinate the attacks and the activities of these various groups which are part of the PMF, which is a Iraqi government-backed militia. Those groups started coordinating their activities at the behest of the Iranian regime and under the name Islamic Resistance of Iraq. I hope that was understandable. It was a bit of a challenge for me to understand as well, but this is how it goes here in the Middle East. These groups have been attacking Israel, and that is why we're talking about them. And their activities threaten to pull Israeli resources and activities away from its main focus, which at the moment is the fighting against Hezbollah in Lebanon. So if we're looking at what this means for Israel's current situation, it's clear that the growing integration, the growing coordination of these Iran-backed groups, those in Iraq, those in Syria, as well as Hezbollah, which is the main group and the Iranian crown jewel in this whole network. This all is a growing concern to Israel, but also to the US. As I said, Israel's main focus at the moment in the fighting is the fighting against Hezbollah in Lebanon. One of the main reasons why Israel has been very hesitant to escalate the fighting in the north, despite Hezbollah's attacks, incessant attacks on Israeli towns and communities in northern Israel, has been the strong push by the US preventing Israel from doing so. The US fears that if the fighting devolves into possibly a ground war with Israel entering Lebanese territory, that Iran will tell all of its groups, all of its forces that we mentioned earlier, to help Hezbollah, to arm Hezbollah, to reinforce it with fighters, and also to start attacking, increasing its attacks on US forces in the region. And this will inevitably pull in the US and pull it into this war. So in conclusion, we can basically return to the start of this video. As I mentioned before, Israel's war is mainly with Iran and not with all of its small proxies across the region. And we haven't even mentioned the Yemeni Houthis, which have also been pestering Israel for these last months. As Israel's leadership has reiterated again and again, Iran is behind all of this, and the strategic picture, if we're looking at the bigger picture, the war is between Israel and Iran. What Iran does by instigating the attacks of its proxy forces is both divert Israeli attention and resources, and also prevent that Iran will ever directly be held accountable. Even if the US has been carrying out strikes against all of the aforementioned groups in Syria and Iraq, Iran itself is never held responsible and has never been attacked until now. Even if we're looking back at last April, when the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which we mentioned throughout the video, helped Iran in attacking Israel in its huge missile and drone strike, the reaction by Israel was very muted, again due to US pressure, and Iran basically escaped any consequences for its actions. So even if we're looking at the emergence of a new player in the region, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, the true story behind all of this continues to be the Iranian aggression through its network of military proxies across the region. And the question remains if it will ever face the consequences, and if Israel and the US will attack it directly in the coming months or years ahead. For more updates on this topic and everything else that is going on across the Middle East, follow us on our social media channels or visit us at allisrael.com.